Inside the Lenox Lounge, the air is thick with cigarette smoke curling under amber bulbs. A three-piece jazz band plays something slow, something that makes time feel heavy. Red leather booths line the walls. Conversations hum beneath the music. It's a Friday night in Harlem, late spring 1958. Sam stands 3 feet behind Bumpy Johnson. His right hand is wrapped around cold steel in his coat pocket. A .38 revolver. Clean, loaded, ready. His daughter's face flashes in his mind. Grace, 8 years old, pale as a bedsheet, coughing blood into a white cloth in the colored ward at Harlem Hospital. Tuberculosis. The doctor said she had months, maybe weeks. Sam's hand tightens on the grip. Bumpy leans forward to light a cigarette, back exposed. Sam pulls the trigger. Click. Not a bang. A hollow, mechanical failure. And the room doesn't freeze because of a gunshot. It freezes because of silence. Because that sound, that tiny, impossible click, is louder than any scream. That click wasn't luck. It was strategy. Bumpy Johnson knew for weeks that his most trusted man was coming to kill him. And instead of killing Sam first, instead of making him disappear into the East River or burying him under a construction site in the Bronx, he let it happen. Why? Because in Harlem in 1958, power wasn't about who you killed. It was about who watched you decide not to. This story is about a betrayal that never completed, a murder that never happened, and a lesson delivered in front of a room full of witnesses. It's about a bodyguard who had no choice, a crime boss who saw it coming, and the sound that changed everything. But to understand why that gun didn't fire, you need to understand what Harlem was in those days, what the numbers game meant, what Bumpy Johnson represented, and why the Italian mob wanted him dead so badly they turned his own man against him. Before we go further, where are you watching from? Drop your city in the comments. Let's see how far this story travels. Harlem in the 1950s wasn't just a neighborhood. It was an economy under siege. You need to picture this clearly. A place where banks wouldn't loan you money because of the color of your skin, where landlords charged double what they charged downtown, where a college degree didn't guarantee you anything except a job as a porter or a maid, if you were lucky. Legal work was strangled by redlining, by union restrictions, by 1,000 invisible walls that kept black residents locked out of the American dream everyone else got to chase. So Harlem built its own system. It was called the numbers game. Some people called it policy. Others just called it playing the number. And if you weren't from there, you might have thought it was organized crime. But to the people who lived it, it was something else entirely. It was community gambling, a daily ritual tied to hope and small stakes. Here's how it worked. You picked a 3-digit number. Could be anything. Your birthday, your address, a number you dreamed about, a number your grandmother swore by. You placed your bet with a runner on the street corner, in the barber shop while you waited for a cut, at the beauty salon while your wife got her hair done, at the candy store where your kids bought penny sweets. Bets were nickels, dimes, quarters, pocket change. But at scale? Millions of dollars moved through Harlem every year. The infrastructure was sophisticated. Writers and runners collected bets on street corners, in shoe shine stands, in bars that smelled like gin and old wood. They carried slips of paper, small notebooks, mental tallies they'd memorized in case the cops rolled through. Drop spots were everywhere. Tucked into the back of mom-and-pop stores, behind laundromats, inside pool halls where the click of billiard balls covered the sound of money-changing hands. Controllers reconciled the books at the end of each day, cross-checking slips, making sure no one skimmed off the top. And at the very top were the bankers, Men who financed the payouts when someone hit. Men who absorbed the risk when the cash flow got tight. Men who kept the whole machine running smooth. It wasn't just a racket. It was employment. It employed hundreds of people. People who couldn't get hired anywhere else, people the so-called legitimate economy had decided weren't worth the trouble. And the numbers bankers? They weren't just gangsters. They were shadow mayors. When your rent came up short, you went to the numbers man before you went to the landlord. When your son got arrested and needed bail, the numbers man fronted it. When someone in your building died and the family couldn't afford a funeral, the numbers man covered it. Medical bills, school fees, emergency cash to get you through the winter. It all flowed through the same hands that ran the numbers. Walk down 125th Street on a summer evening in 1957, and you'd see it all. Steam rising from manhole covers. The scrape of dice on asphalt outside a pool room. The low hum of a counting room behind a laundromat where 3 men in shirt sleeves tallied slips under a single hanging bulb. You'd smell fried fish from corner joints. Pomade and perfume thick in the air, the faint burn of tobacco and whiskey drifting out of open doorways. It was a world that ran parallel to the one white America saw on the news. It had its own rules, its own courts, its own system of justice. And when someone from the outside tried to take over the numbers, when they tried to force a partnership or demand tribute or cut themselves in on the action, it wasn't just business. It was economic colonization. It was an attack on the neighborhood itself. Because the money that stayed in Harlem kept Harlem alive. The moment it started flowing somewhere else, downtown, to Brooklyn, linked to the Italian social clubs where men in tailored suits sipped espresso and talked about diversification, that was the moment Harlem started dying. By 1958, that pressure was building. Word on the street said the 5 families wanted in. They wanted Harlem's numbers. They wanted control of the cash, the flow, the infrastructure. And the only man standing in their way was Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson. What's the weather like where you are right now? Type it below. We'll wait. Because you're about to meet the man who held the line. The man who understood that in Harlem, power wasn't just about muscle. It was about knowing who was desperate, who was loyal, and who, like Sam, was about to break. Ellsworth Bumpy Johnson was the kind of man who shouldn't have existed. At least not the way the papers talked about organized crime. And he didn't fit the mold. He wasn't flashy. He didn't wear gold rings or drive custom Cadillacs with his name painted on the side. He walked the streets in a pressed suit and a fedora, and when he passed, people nodded. Some out of respect, some out of fear, most out of both. He was a paradox. On one hand, Bumpy paid grocery bills for families who couldn't make rent. He funded youth boxing programs so kids had somewhere to go after school instead of the corners. When Mrs. Patterson's husband died and left her with 4 children and no income, Bumpy made sure the landlord didn't evict her. When the church on 135th needed a new roof, an envelope showed up with no return address. Cash inside, enough to cover it twice over. On the other hand, if you stole from him, you paid double. If you disrespected him in public, you learned why people called him Bumpy, named after the knot on his head from a prison fight. But also a reminder that he'd survived things that would have killed softer men. He didn't just own the streets, he held court on them. Bumpy wasn't a Robin Hood. Let's be clear about that. He wasn't stealing from the rich to give to the poor. He was the rich in Harlem, at least by the neighborhood standards. But he understood something most gangsters didn't. Loyalty isn't bought with fear alone. You need people to believe you're on their side, even when you're taking a cut of everything they earn. He was a landlord who knew when to forgive rent. And his real weapon? It wasn't a gun. It was social intelligence. In a neighborhood where everyone was watched, by cops looking for arrests, by snitches trying to shave time off their sentences, by poverty itself grinding people down to their breaking points. Bumpy was the one doing the watching back. He knew who was desperate, who was too proud to ask for help, who drank too much and talked too loose, who had gambling debts they couldn't cover, who was sleeping with someone else's wife, who owed money to the wrong people, who was one bad week away from doing something stupid. He read people the way a card sharp reads a deck. That's how he survived. Not by being the toughest man in Harlem, though he was tough, but by being the smartest, by knowing what people needed before they asked, by making himself indispensable, by becoming the man you called when the city failed you, when the system turned its back, when you had nowhere else to go. By 1958, Bumpy controlled Harlem's numbers. The whole operation ran through him. Writers, the controllers, bankers, all of it. That made him wealthy. That made him powerful. And that made him a problem for people with much bigger territories. But let's be clear. Bumpy Johnson wasn't a saint. If you crossed him, you disappeared. If you stole from him, you paid double. If you lied to his face, you'd be lucky if all you lost was a few teeth. And if you tried to kill him, well, that's where this gets interesting. Because by the spring of 1958, someone was trying to kill him. Not just someone. Multiple people. Word on the street said the Italian mob had put a price on his head. $50,000, some said. Maybe more. The number kept changing depending on who you asked. But the message was the same. Bumpy Johnson was in the way, and someone wanted him gone. The problem? Bumpy was too visible, too loved, too protected. You couldn't just walk up and shoot him on the street. Too many witnesses, too much heat, too much risk. You needed someone on the inside, someone he trusted, someone like Sam. Hit that like button if you're still with me. We're just getting started. By 1958, Harlem's rackets were pulling in serious money. Numbers, loan sharking, protection, after-hours clubs. Millions of dollars a year moved through that 6-square-mile stretch of Manhattan. And the Italian mob noticed. The 5 families, Genovese, Gambino, Lucchese, Colombo, Bonanno, controlled most of New York's underworld. They had the docks, the unions, the construction rackets, the waste hauling contracts. They had politicians on payroll and judges in their pockets. But Harlem ran itself. That stuck in their teeth. It wasn't personal, not at first. It was business. Diversification. If heat rises in one borough, you shift the money somewhere else. If the Fed starts sniffing around the docks, you lean harder on gambling. If gambling gets too hot, you pivot to loan sharking. That's how you stay in business for decades instead of years. But Harlem was locked down, and the man holding the lock was Bumpy Johnson. Picture this. A sit-down in a dim Brooklyn social club. Espresso cups on a small table. Cigar smoke curling under low lights. Men in tailored suits, silk ties, cufflinks, shoes shined to mirrors, discussing Harlem like it's a stock they want to short. They didn't need to own Harlem. They just needed to control the flow. Demand tribute. A percentage off the top paid weekly. Force partnerships. Your numbers operation keeps running, but now you're buying protection, using their enforcers, funneling cash through their channels. Control supply lines. If you want to operate, you go through them first. It's not conquest. It's taxation. And taxation, historically, is more profitable than war. But Bumpy refused to pay, refused to partner, refused to let a single dollar leave Harlem unless it was on his terms. To the mob, that wasn't just stubborn, it was disruptive. Because if Bumpy could hold Harlem independent, what's to stop other operators in the Bronx, in Brooklyn, in Queens from trying the same thing? What's to stop every neighborhood boss from saying, "Why do I need to kick up to you?" Bumpy wasn't just blocking them from Harlem, he was blocking the model. And so, by late 1957, word started spreading. Whispers in bars, conversations in back rooms, a contract, a price. $50,000 on Bumpy Johnson's head. Or maybe it was 30, maybe 75. The number kept changing depending on who you asked, depending on how drunk the guy telling the story was, depending on whether he was trying to impress you or scare you. But in Harlem, the rumor of a price was as good as the price itself. Because once people believe you're marked, they start acting like you're already dead. Allies get nervous, suppliers get cautious. People stop taking your calls. Your protection starts to erode, not because anyone's betrayed you yet, but because everyone's hedging their bets. That's psychological warfare. The problem, though, was execution. Bumpy Johnson wasn't some mid-level hustler you could corner in an alley. He was too visible, too beloved, too protected. He moved through Harlem like a mayor, always surrounded, always watched. You couldn't just walk up and shoot him on 125th Street in broad daylight, not without half the block seeing your face, not without starting a war that would bring heat the mob didn't want. And you couldn't lure him out of Harlem easily. He knew the city, he knew the traps, so the contract sat. Weeks turned into months. The price allegedly went up. And still, no one could get close. Until someone had a better idea. You don't go to Bumpy Johnson. You go through him. You find someone already inside, someone with access, someone who stands close enough to put a gun to his back without raising suspicion. Someone desperate enough to do it. Someone like Sam. Sam wasn't a villain. That's important to understand. He was one of Bumpy's most trusted men. Had been for 7 years. Ex-boxer, light heavyweight, and decent record before a broken hand ended his career in the ring. After that, he worked security. The kind of guy who opened doors and watched exits. Quiet, loyal, the type who didn't need to talk much because his presence said everything. Bumpy trusted him. Trusted him enough to have him stand close, to carry his coat, to ride in the front seat, to know where he'd be and when. That trust was about to cost them both. Sam had a daughter, Grace, 8 years old, big eyes and a laugh that used to fill their cramped apartment on 132nd Street. She loved jump rope, loved singing along to the radio, loved helping her mother cook Sunday dinners. Then she got sick. Tuberculosis. In 1958, TB wasn't the death sentence it used to be, but only if you could afford treatment. Real treatment, the kind that meant months in a sanitarium upstate, always with clean air and proper medicine and doctors who gave a damn. Grace was in Harlem Hospital's colored ward, overcrowded, understaffed. The smell of disinfectant barely covered the smell of decay. She coughed blood into white cloths that her mother tried to wash and reuse because they couldn't afford to keep buying new ones. The doctors said she had months, maybe less. Sam spent every dollar he had, borrowed from friends, borrowed from loan sharks. It wasn't enough. It was never going to be enough. And then one day, a man approached him. It was outside the hospital. Late afternoon. Sam was sitting on the steps, head in his hands, trying to figure out how to tell his wife that the doctor wanted another $200 for a procedure they couldn't afford. The man wore a nice coat, spoke with a calm voice. No threats, no theatrics. When I hear your daughter's sick. Sam looked up, didn't recognize him. White guy, clean-shaven, looked like a lawyer or an accountant. We can help, the man said. Treatment upstate, real doctors, private room. She could be out by spring. Sam's throat tightened. What do you want? Information, that's all. We just need to know where Bumpy will be, when he'll be there. That's it. It sounded simple. It sounded safe. Sam said no. At first. But the man came back, a week later, with photos of the sanitarium, clean white buildings surrounded by trees, testimonials from families whose kids had been cured, a doctor's letter confirming they had a bed waiting for Grace. Just his schedule, the man said. You're not hurting anyone. You're just telling us where he'll be. So Sam told them. Once. Then they came back. He'd confirm when he'll be at the lounge Friday night. He did. Then, carry this package. Leave it in the coat room. That's all. He did. Each time it felt smaller. Each time it felt like he wasn't really betraying anyone, just giving information, just doing small favors. Until the night they handed him the gun. A .38 revolver. Clean, cold, loaded. Stand close, one shot. Walk out through the kitchen. A car will be waiting on 126th. Grace gets her treatment. You get $5,000, enough to start over somewhere else. Sam stared at the gun like it was a snake. You're already in, the man said. There's no walking back. If you don't do this, we tell Bumpy what you've been doing. And you know what happens then. Sam went home that night and held Grace while she slept. Her breathing was shallow, rattling. Her skin felt like paper. He loved Bumpy like a brother. Bumpy had given him work when no one else would, had paid for his mother's funeral, had loaned him money when his wife was pregnant and they couldn't make rent. But Grace was dying. What do you do when the choice is between loyalty and your child's life? What would you do? Seriously, pause and think about it. Drop a comment. No judgment. Sam made his choice. He took the gun. He showed up to the Lenox Lounge that Friday night, same as always. Stood in his usual spot 3 feet behind Bumpy's chair. And when the moment came, when Bumpy leaned forward to light a cigarette, Sam reached into his coat pocket, wrapped his hand around cold steel, and pulled the trigger. Click. Bumpy Johnson knew for weeks. That's the part people forget when they tell this story. They focus on the gun, the click, the drama. But the real genius happened long before Sam walked into that lounge. Because Bumpy had eyes everywhere. Parking attendants who watched who came and went. Barbers who heard everything said in their chairs. Bartenders who noticed when someone ordered different drinks or drank too fast. Elevator operators who saw who visited which apartments. Cab drivers who remembered routes and drop-off points. Low-status jobs. High visibility. In Harlem, everyone saw everything. And if you knew how to ask, if you knew who to pay, who to trust, who owed you favors, you could map the entire neighborhood's movements like you were reading sheet music. Bumpy noticed the signs first. Sam drinking more than usual. Not sloppy drunk, but steady. A glass before work, 2 glasses after. The kind of drinking a man does when he's trying to quiet his mind. He stopped making eye contact. Not obvious, just a half-second delay, a look that slid past instead of landing. He got jumpy. When someone approached from behind, Sam's shoulders would tense. When a car backfired on the street, he'd flinch. Small things, the kind of things most people wouldn't catch. But Bumpy wasn't most people. And then, a regular at the corner store, a guy who sold cigarettes and racing forms, mentioned something in passing. Said he'd seen Sam talking to a white man in a Cadillac. Twice. Once outside the hospital, once near the diner on Lenox Avenue. That wasn't normal. Sam didn't have white friends. Didn't do business with white men unless Bumpy was there. And he sure as hell didn't have reasons to be standing on a street corner talking to someone in a Cadillac. So Bumpy had someone follow him. Quiet, careful, and just enough to confirm what he already suspected. They saw Sam meet the same man a third time, saw money change hands. Not a lot, maybe 100, maybe 2. Enough to know it wasn't a loan, it was payment. Bumpy didn't need a confession. He needed a pattern. And once he had it, he had a choice to make. He could have killed Sam quietly, made him disappear. A body in the river, a shallow grave in Jersey. A story about how Sam took off in the middle of the night and nobody knew where he went. That's what most men would have done. But Bumpy understood something most men didn't. Killing a traitor in private makes you look afraid. It makes people wonder if you're losing your grip. It makes the next betrayal easier because no one sees the consequences. Option A. Kill the traitor privately. Shows fear, shows weakness. It's option B. Let it play out publicly. Shows control. Bumpy chose option B. But he needed to control the outcome. Because if Sam succeeded, if that gun actually fired, then Bumpy Johnson was just another dead hustler, and the mob would roll into Harlem the next day like they owned the place. So Bumpy came up with a plan. Get access to Sam's gun, swap it with a dummy, or sabotage it so it wouldn't fire. Let Sam make his move in front of a room full of witnesses. Let everyone see what happens when you break faith. Let the story spread through every bar, every barbershop, every street corner in Harlem. Because in Harlem, a lesson taught in public is a lesson remembered. The details of how Bumpy got the gun are murky. Some say he had someone break into Sam's apartment while Sam was at work. Some say he had a trusted associate offer to clean it for him as a favor. Some say Sam left his coat unattended at the lounge one night, and that was all the opportunity Bumpy needed. What matters is this. By the time Friday night rolled around, Bumpy Johnson knew exactly what Sam was going to do. He knew when, he knew where, he knew how, and he let it happen. If this story has you hooked, subscribe. We dig into cases like this every week. Don't miss the next one. Because what happened next? That moment in the Lenox Lounge, that click, that silence, wasn't just about stopping a murder. It was about sending a message that would echo through Harlem for years. The Lenox Lounge on Lenox Avenue and 125th Street wasn't the fanciest spot in Harlem, but it had something most places didn't: atmosphere. Red leather booths lined the walls. They cracked in places, but still elegant. Low amber lighting hung from brass fixtures, casting everything in warm shadow. A small stage at the far end held a 3-piece jazz band. Piano, upright bass, drums, playing to a room that was crowded but never felt packed. It was intimate. Close enough to smell someone's cologne. Close enough to hear a whisper if you leaned in. Close enough to see someone's hand shake when they lifted a glass. The crowd was mixed. Hustlers in sharp suits, musicians waiting for their set, working folks spending their Friday paychecks on drinks and a few hours away from their problems. A few white tourists slumming uptown, wide-eyed and trying not to stare, soaking in what they thought was authentic Harlem. This was Bumpy's territory. Not officially, he didn't own the place, but everyone knew. He had his table, a back corner, back to the wall, always the same spot, always facing the door. It was public but controlled. And that was the point, because every person in that room was a potential witness or a potential juror. Friday night, late spring, 1958. Warm enough that the front doors were propped open, letting in the street sounds, car horns, distant laughter, the hum of the city that never really slept. The air inside smelled like cigarette smoke, bourbon, and sweat mixed with cheap perfume and expensive cigars. Bumpy sat at his usual table, nursing a whiskey, talking low with two men who leaned in close. He was relaxed. Loose tie, jacket draped over the back of his chair. He looked like a man who owned the world, or at least this 6-block slice of it. Sam stood 3 feet behind him, right hand in his coat pocket, left hand hanging loose at his side, fingers twitching slightly. He'd been standing there for 20 minutes, waiting for the right moment, waiting for the crowd to settle into the music, for the attention to drift away from Bumpy's table, for the split second when no one would be looking directly at them. The band was playing something slow, a ballad, the kind of music that makes time feel thick, like you're moving through honey. The piano player's fingers danced across the keys. The bassist plucked a low, mournful line. The drummer brushed the snare with wire brushes, soft as a heartbeat. Sam's heart wasn't soft. It was pounding so hard he thought people could hear it. He thought about Grace, her pale face, the way she coughed, sharp and wet, into that white cloth, the way the cloth came away red. The doctor's voice. Months, maybe less. He thought about the man in the nice coat, the promise, the sanitarium, the fresh air, the real doctors. She could be out by spring. He thought about the $5,000, enough to disappear, enough to start over. He thought about Bumpy. 7 years of loyalty, 7 years of trust, 7 years of standing beside a man who treated him like family. His hand tightened on the grip of the .38 revolver. Bumpy leaned forward to light a cigarette. His back was exposed. His head tilted slightly as he cupped his hand around the flame. This was the moment. Sam pulled the gun from his pocket, raised it, aimed at the base of Bumpy's skull, 3 feet away. Point blank. Impossible to miss. The room didn't stop. Not yet. The music kept going. Someone laughed at the bar. A woman's voice, high and bright. Ice clinked in a glass. Sam pulled the trigger. Click. Not a gunshot. A hollow, mechanical failure. A sound so small it should have been swallowed by the music, by the laughter at the bar, by the hum of 50 conversations happening at once. But somehow, everyone heard it. The piano player's hands froze mid-chord. The bassist's fingers stopped. The drummer's brushes hovered above the snare. The music died mid-note, like someone had cut the power. Conversations stopped. Glasses paused halfway to lips. Every head in the room turned toward the back corner. Bumpy Johnson didn't turn around. He just kept smoking. Slow drag. Exhale. The cigarette glowed orange in the dim light. Calm. Like he'd been waiting for this his entire life. Sam stood there, arms still extended, gun still aimed. His hand was shaking now, not a little, a lot. He pulled the trigger again. Click. Again. Click. Again. Click. 6 chambers, 6 failures. The gun wasn't just broken. It was dead. Sam stared at it like it had betrayed him, like it was supposed to save his daughter and instead it had become a prop in someone else's play. Bumpy took one more drag and stubbed the cigarette out in the ashtray on his table. Slow, deliberate. He stood, smoothed the front of his shirt, and finally turned around. He looked Sam in the eye. No anger, no rage, just a kind of tired disappointment. "You got something to say, Sam?" Sam's mouth opened. No words came out. His throat was closing, his chest was tight. The gun slipped from his hand and hit the floor with a dull thud that sounded louder than it should have. His hands were shaking, his whole body was shaking. They said, his voice cracked. They said they'd save her. Grace, my daughter, they said. He couldn't finish, couldn't breathe. Bumpy stepped closer. Not threatening, not violent, just present. You should have come to me. 4 words. Quiet, almost gentle. And that broke Sam completely. He collapsed. Not physically, he stayed on his feet. But something inside him crumbled. His face twisted. His shoulders shook. Tears ran down his cheeks, and he didn't bother wiping them away. She's dying, Sam whispered. She's dying, Bumpy. They said they'd put her in a sanitarium. Real doctors, real treatment. I didn't... His voice choked off. I didn't know what else to do. Bumpy didn't move, didn't touch him. Just stood there, 3 feet away, looking at a man he'd trusted for 7 years, a man who'd just tried to kill him. So, you were going to put a bullet in my head. Sam nodded, couldn't speak. They couldn't look at him. For $5,000 and a promise. Another nod. Bumpy exhaled slowly, shook his head, not in anger, in something sadder, something heavier. He turned to face the room. 50 people, maybe more, all watching, all silent, witnessing. This wasn't just about Sam. It was never just about Sam. This was about every runner, every controller, every writer, every associate who might be sitting at home right now wondering if they should take a meeting with a man in a nice coat. Wondering if the money was worth it. Wondering if Bumpy Johnson was as untouchable as people said. Bumpy didn't need to kill Sam. He needed the room to see what happens when you break faith. He needed them to see that betrayal doesn't end in a bullet. It ends in this, standing in front of everyone you know, stripped bare, humiliated, broken. Public execution without a drop of blood. Bumpy looked around the room slowly, let his eyes land on faces, let people feel the weight of his gaze. Then he looked back at Sam. Get out. 2 words. Quiet. Final. Sam stumbled toward the door. No one stopped him. No one helped him. They just watched as he pushed through the crowd and out into the Harlem night. A man with nowhere left to go. The door swung shut behind him. For a moment, the room stayed frozen. Then Bumpy sat back down, picked up his whiskey, took a sip. The piano player's hands found the keys. The music started again. And life in the Lenox Lounge continued, like nothing had happened at all. Sam didn't die that night. Not on the floor of the Lenox Lounge, not with a gun in his hand. And when the room finally exhaled, when the whispers started and the chairs scraped backward, Bumpy Johnson made a choice that surprised everyone. He didn't order a beating. He didn't call for blood. He simply had Sam escorted out the same door he'd walked in through. Alive, but finished. Because in Harlem, exile was worse than death. Sam stepped back onto the street with no allies, no protection, and no future. Word traveled faster than he ever could. By sunrise, everyone knew. He was the man who tried and failed to kill Bumpy Johnson. No crew would take him in. No boss would trust him. No one would even sit at a table with him. In a world built on reputation, his was radioactive. He disappeared into the margins. Not hunted, not forgiven. Just erased. Grace's fate was different. Bumpy paid for her treatment in full. Quietly. No headlines, and no favors called in. He had her transferred to a sanitarium upstate, clean rooms, real doctors, a chance at something resembling peace. Not because he forgave Sam, but because Grace hadn't betrayed anyone. She was collateral in a war she never volunteered for. And Bumpy understood the difference. That decision sent its own message through Harlem. Loyalty mattered, but innocence still counted for something. The mob took notice too. The failed hit echoed far beyond the Lenox Lounge. Contracts don't usually survive embarrassment like that. Officially, the bounty on Bumpy Johnson stayed active. Unofficially, no one rushed to claim it. Because if a hit could be sabotaged from the inside, if Bumpy could see it coming before the trigger was pulled, what chance did an outsider have? Fear shifted shape. It wasn't about violence anymore. Yeah, and it was about inevitability. The story spread. It always does. Barbershops, back rooms, kitchen tables at 2 in the morning. Each retelling sharpened the edges, added new details, new theories. Some said the gun was never loaded. Some said Bumpy swapped it himself. Some swore it was divine intervention, God's hand slipping between metal and fate. But the truth is simpler. Bumpy knew. He knew Sam was desperate. He knew Grace was sick. He knew money was the lever everyone pulled eventually. And knowing was enough. He didn't need to stop the hit with force. He let it collapse under its own weight. He turned an execution into a lesson, and Harlem listened. If you made it this far, you're part of the Mafia legend family. Subscribe, hit the bell, and drop a comment with your theory. How do you think Bumpy pulled it off? It's easy to reduce this story to heroes and villains, to frame Sam as weak, Bumpy as untouchable. But real life is never that clean. Sam's choice wasn't about good versus evil. It was about survival. When systems fail you, when hospitals turn you away, when banks won't loan you money, when the law won't protect you, people make decisions that look insane from the outside. Desperation compresses time. It narrows vision. It convinces you that one impossible act might be better than a slow, certain loss. That's where Sam lived. Bumpy, on the other hand, lived somewhere else entirely. His real power wasn't physical. It was social. He didn't control Harlem because he was the most violent man in the room. He controlled it because he understood people better than anyone else. He knew who was loyal, who was scared, and who was lying to themselves. Information was his weapon, and the community was his amplifier. Everyone in that room at the Lenox Lounge became a witness. In a place where official history rarely bothered to record black lives, oral history carried everything. Stories were currency. Memory was resistance. That's why this moment survived. It didn't happen in the shadows. It happened in public, where denial wasn't possible and myth could take root. The neighborhood told the story for decades, because the neighborhood owned it. And that tells us something important about organized crime. It's not about guns. It's about leverage. Whoever controls the money controls the neighborhood. And whoever controls the narrative controls the memory. Violence gets attention, but perception builds empires. Bumpy understood that power was something you demonstrated, not something you announced. By letting the attempt fail on its own, he turned a threat into proof. Proof that he was always one step ahead. Proof that Harlem was spoken for. Proof that survival sometimes belongs to the man who listens instead of the man who fires first. That click, that hollow mechanical failure, didn't just save Bumpy Johnson's life. It echoed. It rippled through Harlem and beyond, settling into the minds of every would-be assassin, every rival boss, every ambitious outsider looking north and wondering if the prize was worth the risk. It reminded them that this place already had a guardian, and the man holding the line wasn't the loudest. He wasn't the most brutal. He was the one who paid attention. In a world obsessed with force, Bumpy Johnson proved something quieter and far more dangerous. Awareness wins wars before they start. He didn't need to pull the trigger. He let the truth do the work. That's why this story still matters. Because sometimes history doesn't turn on explosions or headlines, but on a single sound that doesn't happen. So now I'll ask you, what time is it where you are right now? Let me know in the comments. And if this story got you thinking, share it. Stories like this deserve to be remembered. Thanks for watching. Until next time, stay curious.